Ready? Chapter 8 A Drunken Night. As they moved towards the third camp, Keon felt himself sway as he walked. He had no energy left. This would be another night without sleep, carrying Aino on his back, walking who knows how many kilometers. He looked around, but none of the mages seemed tired, walking in the same tempo as they had the previous night. Aino noticed that Keon was slowing down in pace. "I don't mind giving you a boost if you need it," she whispered in his ear. He nodded, and in the same moment he felt a burst of energy explode throughout his body. Not a trace of fatigue left, wide awake, like he had just started the journey after a good night's sleep. "What other tricks do you have up your sleeve?" he asked her. Aino smiled. "You'll see soon enough." When they arrived, several of the officers at the third camp had already returned, including the Major General. He walked up to them, nodded as a greeting towards Yua, then turned and looked directly at Aino. He was big, almost as tall as Yua, and built in quite the same way. The Major General's face, however, stood out quite a bit from the rest of the crowd. Aino had to admit that he was by far the most handsome man out of all the mages they had run into so far. His facial structure and traditional hairstyle seemed to match each other perfectly. "Greetings, Creator. I am Banke Björnsson, Major General in Ayla's Blood Army," he said and bowed to her. Aino studied him as he stood there bent down in front of her. She was starting to feel increasingly uncomfortable with all the bowing from the generals. She wasn't their creator. They just had her blood in them. That was all. A woman came up to them carrying a giant box. All heads turned in her direction. It was easy to see why. She, like Banke, seemed to have won the genetic lottery when it came to looks. She had her hair tied in a simple ponytail, reaching no further than her shoulders, yet she looked anything short of gorgeous. "Hey, look what I found! They must be really old. Ah, fine wine!" The woman stopped in her steps and immediately dropped the box as soon as she saw Yua. "General, I—" A drawn-out howl of pain was heard throughout the camp. "Ah, my foot! I dropped it on my foot! I think I broke my toes! Ah!" She fell to the ground, rolling around holding her foot. Atle looked at Yua with a tired expression. "This is the best you could do?" Yua ignored him and instead dove straight into the box. He started pulling out the bottles. "Damn, Lieutenant Colonel Freya, you did well. This is some real fine wine indeed." The poor woman, red in the face from pain, gave a strained smile towards the Lieutenant General as she laid on the ground. Apparently that giant box of wine wasn't the only one they had found. 2 more officers came in carrying boxes just as large. "Well, we are staying here for the night. Wine and food for everyone," Yua declared loudly, looking like he had just gotten an early birthday gift. Happy cheers were heard as the officers started grabbing the wine bottles. Keon leaned over one of the boxes and took a look at one of the labels on the bottles. 2027. 50 years before the old world ended. In what bunker had the officers found these? "These officers are among the least stealthy people I have ever met," Aino said to Keon as the buzz grew louder and louder around the camp. "I wonder if they ever reflect over the fact that they are so heavy that the ground shakes as they move," Keon added. "I heard that!" Keon turned his head to see Lia stare at him with intense hatred. "I heard that. You called me fat." Keon in return looked at her in complete confusion. "I didn't say that, I said," she interrupted him. "But that's what you meant. I know you." She kept her eyes focused on him while she moved towards one of the campfires. Keon and Aino went to sit down by one of the campfires next to Tyr and Atle. The colonel looked very happy as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a fistful of berries. Aino respectfully declined. "Oh no, thank you. I'm not that fond of blueberries. It's not the taste, it's just the texture." The smile immediately disappeared from Tyr's face, and he looked like she had just jammed a dagger right through his heart. "Never mind, thank you, I'll have some," Aino said quickly. The colonel's face lit up once again as he gave her way too many of them. "I picked them over there." He pointed to a close-by forest. There were lots of them. I'm going to pick more tomorrow before we leave. A pained sound was heard from Atle. Stop talking about berries. I'm not on duty. You can't tell me what to do, Tyr answered in a testy tone. The two men then proceeded to mope while shooting angry glances at each other. Aino looked around the fire. The scene playing out in front of her was quite the special one. To the left of the fire sat 3 officers, 2 men and the lieutenant colonel from earlier. The man seated in the middle leaned in closer towards her. So you and I, Freya? You wanna? He wiggled his eyebrows at her, which were quite thick, unlike his beard. It was rather patchy, and the strands that had been able to grow seemed to hang on for dear life. No, she answered quickly. Why not? Is it because you dropped that box on your foot earlier? It still hurts, huh? He asked sympathetically. No, Aemond, it's because you're ugly, she answered, looking slightly annoyed. The man seated next to Aemond, who had previously not been engaged in his fellow officer's conversation, now entered it by using his large mouth to spit out his drink in a cascade right over the fire. He quickly followed up the action with an hysterical laugh, making his thick short blonde hair bounce up and down in the process. Oh man, I was just asking, no need to be so mean. Why are you laughing, Captain? Aemond sounded genuinely hurt. It's funny because it's true, you are ugly, Major, the captain shouted as he continued laughing while slapping his own leg. The major buried his face in his large hands and started sobbing. To the left sat a wailing Leah with another officer who seemed like she genuinely wished that she had chosen another place to sit. She was chugging a whole bottle of wine while rolling her eyes at Leah's non-stop whining. He called me fat. I'm not fat. Just because he didn't grow, he takes it out on me. You know, it never stops. He bullied me when I was young, and he never stops. She made some unintelligible noises. Keon sighed as he, like everyone else, was subjected to Leah's whining. People change. I'm not the same person now as I was back then. But all she sees is the past. He shook his head. Aino gave him a sympathetic look. Maybe because she still lives there. Time seems to have stopped for her. All of a sudden Aino noticed a face right by hers, staring intensely at her features. I don't get it. Yua's breath reeked of alcohol. He was drunk. I thought you would look different. That there would be something special about you. But there isn't. You're so average looking. He backed away slowly as he kept his eyes on her. Or well tried. He wasn't quite sure which of her heads to look at. I mean, I wouldn't even look twice at you if it wasn't for the fact that you're good. He didn't get any further than that, as he was hit by Atle's perfectly placed uppercut. Yua flew through the air and landed right on the fire, almost extinguishing it. The officers sitting at the opposite side of the fire, including Major General Banke, started excitingly chanting for a fight. Yua got up, fists in the air. He wobbled for a bit, then finally threw a punch at Atle, missing with about a meter, falling over, and face-planting right on the ground. Timber! One of the officers called out while chuckling happily. Atle sat down again. Damn blabbermouth, he mumbled under his breath. He looked at Yua laying stretched out on his stomach in the grass, snoring away, seemingly content with life. He shook his head. The lack of discipline at this camp was astonishing. Eventually both Tyr and Atle wandered away into the night to get some sleep. Atle muttering something about how this wasn't his camp, so he wasn't going to take any night shifts. Keon looked around at the other campfires, but no one really seemed to be on guard duty. All the officers were snoring away happily, in more or less comfortable positions, around each of the now almost extinguished fires. It seems to be only you and I awake right now, plus the Major General opposite us, he said to Aino. I don't think he's awake, she replied. Keon looked over at him. Indeed, he seemed to have fallen asleep in a sitting position. Suddenly his head jerked right up. He looked around in confusion, trying to find out where he was. Fell asleep on guard duty? Aino asked him, amused by his dazed expression. Definitely not. he answered, blinking a few times extra in an attempt to wake himself up. Right. So what were I and Keon talking about? Bunky gathered his thoughts. I wouldn't know. It's rude to listen into other people's conversation, he said in a composed manner as he focused his eyes on the campfire. After several minutes of him sitting immobile staring into the fire, both Aino and Keon became suspicious. He fell asleep again? Aino asked in disbelief. That has to be some sort of special skill, Keon said, slightly impressed.